warm-up shirts, and sometimes they have numbers on those. And the one thing that I want to stress is that just because they have a number on a warm-up T-shirt that they've got on, it doesn't mean it's the same number as their jersey uniform as well, too. So when we're checking rosters, we may not want to confide it or use that for,
That's right,
for
yeah.
saying that. Some other things, too, just the legality of the uniforms, too, really with if they are using a Libro, if the Libro and the rest of the team, if their jerseys are contrasting enough, that's the big change too, making sure they're contrasting and can definitely tell them apart. You don't want to wear white and light gray because it's very hard to tell the difference between those two.
Yep.
Or black and Kelly green could also be difficult, but that's something that officials have to look at and judge and make a determination on that piece as well.
During the pre-match conference, it should have been brought up, verifying with the coaches that all the players were legally equipped. And so if anybody has any casts of races or anything, we usually ask for the coaches to bring that player to us sometime during the warm-ups so that we can verify that they're legal.
Right. And with that, if we have a young lady playing that has a letter from the MISHA stating that they can play with a specific device, that it's been approved, or a type of headgear, anything that they have to approve that's not legal typically to play with.
That's true.
Determining also about sometimes it's just you get caught up in the or in the time and that 10 seconds on who's blowing that whistle, to have teams come off the court and the next team getting ready to get onto the court for their time for warm-up. Ken, what else do you have exciting over there?
Well, we're trying to first of all figure out if we're on the air or not. So that's the first thing. So hopefully we are.
Oh, well, that'd be good. You were on it before you realized it too. Don and I saw that.
So we're just going to continue and assume that we are on the air. So we'll just kind of keep going here. So I'm not sure which camera is on. If it's us, is it us? Okay, this is the camera that's on. Okay, so can we go to camera 2? Can we go to camera 2? All right, camera 2, and then you're on camera 2. So the thing is, we're kind of watching the warm-ups now, and different coaches have different ways of doing their warm-ups. And remember, when you're out there as a referee, this is a great time right now to be watching the setters. So we want consistency, and we've mentioned that in the GKCOA meetings. Consistency is a big deal in terms of what we want out of our ball handling. That is the number one thing that coaches have issues with when it comes to referees. And right now, assuming you've gotten all your pre-match responsibilities done like we have, okay, getting your table talked to, making sure the line judges are visited with, making sure you and your fellow referee have had a good pregame, and making sure, obviously, you've done the coin toss and taken care of all those issues. Hopefully, you've got a little bit of time while each team is warming up to be able to watch ball handling. So right now, I'm hoping number 28 and number 13, there looks like Staley's got 2 setters. That's another thing. If they're rotating 2 setters, you can kind of determine that they might be running a 6-2 offense or a 2-setter offense. So these are the kind of things that you can pick up on before first serve even happens. And while you're watching 13 in this case, or 26 on the with the other setter, watch their hands, watch their motions, making sure you kind of can see what it is that you are, what you're doing, okay? And watching for in terms of ball handling, and then hopefully that gives you a little bit of a leg up on other things as well.
And then also, Don, you mentioned about the coaches bringing the lineup to the pre-match meeting, handing it to the R2, very important. Also the roster, I said lineup, the roster, but making sure the lineup is turned in directly to the R2 also within 2 minutes of the start of the match, so that that's handed directly to the R2. Everything is referenced to the R2 with
Yes.
lineups and roster.
And it's a good idea that once the R2 gets that they look it over, make sure that we do have all starters listed. If you have a libero dressed and they didn't write the libero number down on the lineup, verify with the coach that they don't intend to use the libero. Sometimes they don't. But if they don't have it on the lineup and we start the set, they can't add it after the fact.
Right. Good preventative officiating and double checking with it. That's okay to do that. And also, as they're coming, making sure that they have those rosters in their hands or send them back to get them, because we want to work together on that and not start off with anything on a unpositive note.
Right. Then after turning in the R2 has verified the lineups, maybe check it over with the roster, make sure all the numbers appear on the roster, they turn it into the score. And that's when the scorekeeper and the libero tracker are going to write it on their respective sheets, and the R2 is going to fill out their lineup card. After that's done, and the R2 should be writing it off of the coach's lineup. I know a lot of scorekeepers like to help out, but if they've written it down wrong and they repeat it back to you incorrectly, now it's going to cause the match isn't going to start off smoothly. So it's best to write it from the coach's lineup and then verify with the scorekeeper and the libero tracker that they've written it correctly. Make sure we all three have the same things.
Right. And if there is an error, I think it's important to go back and get the actual lineup and look at the lineup that the coaches wrote and take that, looking at the court with the actual lineup turned in.
Right. Under high school mechanics, the R2 is required to write a lineup card. They use that when they go out to the sidelines to check the lineups. Beyond that, it's up to the individual official what they want to keep on their lineup card, if they want to track anything else or just refer to it through the match as they need to.
Right. And it is a good reference tool, not
Yes.
to have out and look at. You still need to be able to officiate.
Good point.
All right, I think we're ready to go here, and the horn just sounded, and the teams are huddling up here, and hopefully our camera people are ready to go here. So if we could get camera 2 to get going here and focus on the players. If we get camera 2 on, that'd be great. There we go. Okay, camera 2 is hopefully live. Now you can kind of see the players kind of heading out to the end lines. So that is something that the referees don't have to control. They can just send the players out to the end lines, and the 6 players that are on the lineup are the ones that are supposed to be out there. The libero and the non-starters are supposed to be on the sidelines. So so hopefully that's what happens here. And then when Nicole is ready. So when Nicole is ready, she'll head up to the stand and whistle the players onto the court after the introductions and national anthem here, of course. So we'll take a moment here to have the national anthem play. Okay, as we were saying earlier, the players are now on the end lines, and Nicole heads over to the stand. And one of the things, if you notice there, if you had the camera on the first referee, Nicole looked at the antenna before she got up on the stand, and that's something that was a focus point for referees last year, is to make sure as you go across, make sure that those antenna are straight. A lot of times during the match, obviously the line judge will have a better angle on that, but if you can check that out before the match even starts, that's great. So Nicole whistled him on the court. They shake hands at the net. And now we're ready to go. So now the focus on the floor is with Don, and he'll be checking the lineups. So he has his lineup card on the floor. You do not use the actual rosters in high school volleyball. And so he's got his lineup card, and now he's looking at the lineups. And so if we have a camera down there focused on the second referee on the floor, looking at the lineups, that would be great, because I cannot see what's actually being broadcast. And now he goes from one team to the other. And towards the end, you might notice Don motioning to one of the players and to the referee as far as who the captain is and so forth. I think we might have an issue. Don actually had to go back and take a look at the lineup sheet that the coach turned in. And it looks like Don is saying that one of the players that was on the lineup sheet wasn't out on the court. And so I think he's fixed that situation. He's talking to Coach Weber from Staley to make sure that that was the case. And it looks like we had a switch in terms of who was on the lineup sheet versus who was actually out on the court. And this is exactly why you check, to make sure that the players that are listed on the lineup are the same players that are actually out on the roster, or excuse me, actually out on the court. And so I think number 9 should have been out there, and number 8 was out there instead. And so that's no penalty. There's no loss of rally on that situation as long as we get the same players out there that are listed on the roster. So now what's happening is, well, Coach Weber didn't want number 9 out there, so we have a substitution, and that is legal. They can do that. There's no penalty involved there because Coach Weber wants number 8 out there. The only issue now is if number 9 returns to the set, number 9 has to go in number 8's position. So now that's all taken care of, and now Don rolls the ball out to the first server, and here we go. Now let's see what Nicole calls here. She calls a touch. In other words, that is not considered an illegal contact. And we talked about this in the meetings, that if a ball is taken with 2 hands above the head like that. Now let's see. That should not be whistled as an illegal contact. It's probably a double contact, but again, it's first ball, and so that would be legal. So as we go along here, we're gonna talk about plays and situations. We have a substitution. So we know that the focus for the first match here is on R1, but we have a substitution for R2, and we'll kind of talk about how Don handles those in the second match. So the first match, Staley versus North Kansas City, and they're only 15-point sets. 12-10 is the score, Staley, right now, because we're playing from 10-10 up to 25, win by 2. The line judge calls it in.
One thing I would like to point out, though, is, and I hate to start off with something bad. Whenever we observe the ball hit the floor, we should be whistling immediately, then looking to the line judge to make the call. Because the R2, who is not following the ball, needs to know that the ball's down. If it's a loud gym, they won't hear that. They're going off the R1's whistle.
Excellent point. So now when we have a rotation, this is our first rotation where now Northtown serving, so they rotate. Don now focuses on the receiving team, and Nicole focuses on the serving team. And the ball is served long. We have a net violation. And again, we'll focus on our two things here later. But Don, did you want to chime in on that?
And when she did, she looked to Don to see what he had, and then she awarded the point and mirrored the call. She also mirrored the number of the offender to the coach.
And that's a good point. The R2 signals for a net violation, but it's actually R1 that technically awards the point. So if the R1 agrees with the R2 that there was a net violation, then technically it's that person or the R1 who awards the point. Timeout taken here by North Kansas City. So I know we're only a few points in, Don and Dixie, but anything that you're noticing here from Nicole and Don?
I've noticed that Nicole is doing a good job of keeping her head level and watching the players and looking ahead to where the ball is going to be. And when the ball is head up in the air, her head's not going up with the ball. Because since we have a nice wide open area, you don't have to worry about any kind of overhead obstructions. The ball is going to come down, watch the players, and they're going to let you know where the ball is going to come down.
Definitely makes it easier to call by not bobbing your head up and down watching the ball, because that's not necessary.
That's been a big focus in our GKCOA meetings in terms of being consistent with ball handling. And so glad to see that we're seeing evidence of that with Nicole. I don't know if you noticed that. Don actually looked at the line judge down on his side, and the line judge had some headphones in. And so Don took care of that situation. Headphones are not allowed because obviously a line judge needs to focus in not only with their vision but also their hearing as well. And technically, as long as we're talking about headphones are not allowed at any time on the court for warm-ups. So if you see a player, even a ball shagger that's out there that has headphones in, they need to be alert so that they don't get hit by a stray volleyball. We need to make sure that we're taking care of that as referees and not allowing that to happen. So we had a ball that hit the tape. And I think what we're commenting on is we saw Don Guard give Nicole an informal signal of 4 or 2. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whichever it could have been.
Yeah.
It was the same player. So giving that, and that was up to Nicole to take that or not. The ball wound up going down, so right. She took the down ball. Whichever it could have been.
Yeah. So 18-12 is the score. I'm not sure if we have the score on the screen or not, but 18-12.
Whichever it could have been.
Yeah. And we just had another substitution there. We'll talk about substitution mechanics in the second match. More so since we're talking more about Nicole and R1 responsibilities. Kind of an unusual looking first contact, but again, it wasn't caught or thrown, and so Nicole let it go. It wasn't caught or thrown. So what do you guys think of Nicole's pacing? How is her pacing in terms of letting the match flow at a certain pace? What do you think about that?
She's doing well. Nobody seems rushed. Nobody's standing around waiting on her. And that's one thing. It also helps you with your own composure if you don't feel rushed. Or the match doesn't flow smoothly if you're going too slow either.
And that's something Don said he mentioned at the beginning that was a piece of advice he received, is to slow down. Don't always feel like you have to be in a hurry. But Nicole is also looking at Don as her R2, making sure he's ready as well too. She's not rushing through it.
Hey, let's do this in the truck. Let's go to camera 3 and just focus on Nicole and just isolate on her up on the stand. And so hopefully I think camera 3 is on. And so we'll just watch this rally. We won't watch the ball at all. We'll just watch her and her mechanics for these next couple of points and see. So we have a net serve, because you probably couldn't see that on camera. And notice she awards the point and then gives the net serve signal.
Whenever Don is honoring a request, a substitution or timeout, mirroring that back to him. That also lets him know that she is aware of it and she's not going to start play until he gives the court back. In this case, she overruled the line judge. I think it was her overrule was good. As the first referee, she has the prerogative to overrule any of the line judges.
Hesitation with that call, uncertainty.
So if you couldn't see, the ball hit the floor in front of a serve receiver, and so Nicole awarded the point there. Dixie, you're going to say something, I think, on that? Nope? Okay. 22-14 is the score. So Staley is 3 points away from this set. And the serve is long. Okay, we can go back to camera 2 now and finish the set normally here. As we go along, here, as we get closer to set point, okay, we're going to notice what the communication between Don and Nicole on set point here in a couple of points.
That also includes the signals made by the first referee, not to make them rushed. If you're ever in a match and you find that you're often asked what the call was, you may want to try to consciously slow down on the signals.
And again, good use of line judges there. Again, as Don mentioned earlier, the ball hit the corner. Nicole whistled, then searched and looked for the line judge for the call, and then awarded the point and signaled appropriately. So now we have the libero going back to serve, and notice that there are two regular players, okay, Staley 8 and Staley 16, that exchanged in the libero exchange zone. That can only occur when the libero is serving. So if that happens and the libero's not serving, something's wrong. You needed to check with your scorer's table about what happened. Point for Northtown. It's now 23-18, Staley. And if and when Staley gets the ball back, we're going to have set point. And let's kind of make sure we focus in on the communication that R1 and R2 have on set point. All right, here we go. So now that's the 24th point for Staley. Don, first of all, is going to have some substitutions. And this actually is a pretty good time to talk about this because we have substitutions on both sides. And we'll kind of talk more about it in the second match. But notice Don has told one side to hold on. Okay, and it also depends on the comfort level of the scorer. Don right here now gives a point or set point signal on the shoulder of whichever side has set point. Dixie, you're going to say something? Okay.
Then he's also checking out to see who the captain is because the captain stepped off the court, wanted to make sure Nicole knew who.
And once Don gave Nicole the set point, she only nods to acknowledge it. She doesn't signal set point back to him.
So now if Staley, okay, so now we have a 25th point, and now the communication between Don and Nicole is they both confirm that the set has been won. The end of set signal has been given, and now Nicole gives the switch side signal. Both teams switch sides. The team to Nicole's left has to go around her or around the net on her side. The team that's on Don's side just goes straight across, and the two teams switch sides in front of the scorer's table. So now we have 3 minutes in between sets. Notice that Don collects the ball, and he'll deliver it back to the scorer's table. We would prefer that Don collects the ball instead of giving it to the line judge. That way, Don has control over what happens between sets and as well as when he checks lineups for the next set. Okay, so we are through set one, and anything that we notice about the first set? Okay, let's talk about now what happens between sets. So what are things now that the first referee and the second referee should be thinking about and doing between sets?
The first referee should have the line judges on their side. One of them did report over to her. I'm not sure where the other one went. This is a good opportunity for Nicole to talk to the line judges if there's anything that she needs to correct with them. maybe they're not moving properly when the server is near them, or maybe she wants to discuss with the line judge the one that she overruled. She can just kind of say, hey, way to stay in the game because he did come right back with a good call on the next one.
Right, refresh him on his responsibilities, excuse me, and their actions as a line judge. Don is talking with his table, reviewing anything he may have a question on, answering any questions they may have, and giving them guidance as well.
Another thing, Don needs to be over here at the scorer's table. If he needs to talk to the R1, that's fine, but he also needs to be back over here by the 1 minute mark because now the coaches turn the lineups into him instead of going through the score.
Right. He has them because he's actually looking at the lineups now and writing on his card so that he's aware of the lineups. But definitely, again, I agree with you. He's got to be ready for the coaches to hand him the roster, the lineup, not to the scorekeeper.
Okay, so before the match, I'm sure that that Don and Nicole had an extensive pregame, and so some of the things that I think they've talked about in the pregame, I'm sure we've talked about as well. But one of the things that has not happened that I'd like for the two of you to kind of talk about is back row players, and we have kind of some new informal, discrete signals this year that that can be implemented. How do the two of you recommend that back row players are identified, called? What's the communication pattern between the R1 and the R2? How would the two of you handle that?
I think the main key is to know where the setter is, whether she's front row or back row. And one of the things that needs to be discussed during the pre-match conference is how the R2 is going to communicate to the R1 when the server is back row, or excuse me, the setter is back row. Different people have different ways, and the main thing is just to make sure that you're on the same page because you don't want your R2 signaling something and you don't understand what they're trying to tell you.
Yeah, you don't want to be the R1 and wondering what the heck that R2 is trying to say. If you have that good pre-match beforehand, you're aware of how the R2 would informally give those decisions or those calls to you as the R1.
Right. And if during play the R2 observes something they believe to be a back row player fault, they should discreetly signal in front of their chest, offer it to the R1. Hopefully if it's close and the R1 is questioning it, they might take a peek at the R2 and then either take the call or they can use one of the new informal signals to signal why they're not calling the back row player foul.
Right. But that communication and being able to have your eye on each other is very important as well, too, to at least recognize your R2.
All right, very good. Okay, we've started set 2 here, and again, we're playing 15-point sets. So we've started at 10-10, and that first serve went out of bounds from North Kansas City, so now it's 11-10 Staley. And again, I don't know if the score is up on the screen that you're seeing or not, but we'll kind of remind you as to what the score is as time goes on. And so, point Staley on the attack error by North Kansas City. So the thing is, we're going to talk in the second set, Don and Dixie, about the R2 with overlaps and watching for different formations and so forth. So what is the R1 doing on serve? What are kind of things that Nicole is looking for, like right now in between serves, before she whistles for the next serve? What kind of things does she need to focus on in between rallies?
She could be looking at the players just to remind herself location. Front row, back row players, definitely identifying where that setter is. No, that's one thing I personally do is I want to know where the setter is constantly. And not just front row, back row, but exact location. And then she could be looking at Dawn as well, too, if there's anything that they need to have a little eye communication with. So I think that's important.
Also discuss the importance of scanning the court. You know, before each serve, what is Nicole looking for and scanning the court, and why is that so important in between rallies?
She needs to be, before calling for serve, she needs to be scanning the benches to make sure that you're not going to have any type of libero replacement or a substitution coming up late, any kind of requests from the coach. It's Don's responsibility to whistle it, but Nicole needs to be aware if it's coming out to not be too quick to call for serve. Also, she's going to be making eye contact with Dawn before calling for serve.
So we have a timeout here right now, and that's what caused the stoppage of play and us to discuss it. Dixie, you ready to add something to that?
No, I was just going to go on now. Don is back, and he is giving Nicole the court back. That's very important that the R1 waits for the R2 to give the court back to, because the timeout was called. He's got to get the court going again. So it's very important to make sure the R2 is ready and not just blow the whistle for serve.
Like what stoppages of play will the R2 give the court back to R1? We just had a timeout. What other times does the R2 do that?
It would be either a substitution or any kind of timeout, whether it be a team timeout or an official's timeout.
And then also after they check the lineups prior to the set as well, that's obviously the first time that the R2 will give the court to the R1 to make sure that the R1 knows that we're ready for play.
That's
right. And Ken's signaling that. It's just a hand up. You're handing it back to your partner, to your R1. And so it's a very informal, but yet it's very important.
And again, we're talking high school mechanics here. In other rule sets, namely USAV rule set, they have a different signal for that. But in high school rule set, it's just an open hand kind of directed towards the first referee. All right, back to the action here. 14-12 is the score. Staley is up on North Kansas City. So Don and Dixie, has there been anything about ball handling and anything that we've seen that might be questionable, controversial, or have the setters and the ball handling been pretty good so far?
They've been fairly good, especially for early in the season. She's had a few ball handling calls. I know she's had a couple of doubles on some sets.
So in your guys' opinion, the ball handling has been pretty good, pretty consistent?
I think it's been very consistent.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she has had a couple of calls, doubles, but very consistent with it.
So the Northtown player just sent the ball over with two hands deep. Not this last rally, but just the time before, and she sent it deep with two hands. A lot of times that can be construed, or that can be looked at as a double contact. So what is it that you're looking at on any time someone attacks the ball with two hands? What are you kind of watching for with those situations? Because that does happen frequently.
The hands should make contact together. If you see discernible consecutive contacts, then that has to be called as a double. But if you see no discernible double contact, then no, you shouldn't call it based solely on the technique.
And I think it's important when you call a double to know, and we talked about it the other night, if it's a left-right or right-left contact, and it needs to be a consistent contact, not one than the other. One thing Don's doing too is he steps out of the way and communicates with his table as well too on those substitutions. He's not looking at them, at the players with his back to the table. He opens up to the table, communicates with it, and then he's very patient waiting on them to make sure they're ready to proceed before he gives the court back to Nicole.
Good point. And then in the second match, we're going to really focus in on a lot of the things that the R2 does. And so that was just a great preview there from Dixie on what we're going to talk about a lot more in detail in the second match. So back to the point about scanning the court. So you mentioned that in between rallies, the R1 needs to be cognizant. Now that, yes, the R2 is the one who handles timeouts and subs and so forth, but the R1 needs to be cognizant of what's happening down in front of the scorer's table. Nice block there. Anything of note there on that play is kind of distracted by that block there. Anything that we should take note of there? What would be the R2's main concern with a tight ball like that right on top of the net? What is the R2 kind of looking for there? I know we're talking about R1 and R2, but what are the referees looking for on a ball like that?
Could be either the net could be underneath, going completely over the center line, to make sure that they haven't done anything illegal.
What if the two blockers touch the ball at the same time and the ball becomes motionless above the net? Is that anything?
That's known as a joust, and it's a play on. We don't whistle that.
So if you're watching, and at one time we had a different ruling for that, but not anymore. It's just if the ball becomes motionless because two players are pressing equally on it above the net on each side, then it's a play on. Whoever the strongest person wins. So
that's what I was just saying. Whoever outmuscles who.
That's right. All right, North Kansas City serves. They're only down by a point. It's 18 serving 19. Staley is up by 1. And again, if you joined us late, Staley won the first set, and now North Kansas City trying to come back and win the second one and split this Jamboree. Again, this is a Jamboree. This is taking place first match of the season. We're only playing 2 sets to 15. And this is actually just kind of a scrimmage to start the season. So if you're not watching this live and watching this later, this is the very first time these teams have come out here. And we're only playing to 15 points. Instead of 0 to 15, we're going 10 to 25 just so that they can get the feel for what 25 points, a 25-point set ends like. Is that what you're going to say, Dixie? Did I take your words again?
Yes, Ken keeps saying that we're playing to 15, but the score is now 19 to 20. That consistency piece of always ending a match at 25 or by 2. I think it's important that it's that consistency piece that the girls know that they're playing to 25 every time, even though it's a 10-10 start. Very similar to a lot of tournaments.
Very good. So now Staley just got the side out point there, and we're at 20 all. Staley's libero is serving, and again we had the double replacement. In other words, 2 regular players switched in and out in the libero replacement zone, which is legal as long as the libero is serving, as we mentioned in the first set.
And I think something that happened there is that Nicole recognized that the libero went back to serve, but the player coming in off the bench was a little slow to come up. So she knew that she needed to wait for that replacement to take place before she called for serve.
Well, how long can you wait on that, Don? Because, is there a delay of game involved there or something?
There potentially could be. It would probably be best that the R2 step down and remind the coach, let's make sure we're watching that to keep the game going. If it's becoming disruptive, that's where you could potentially call somebody for unnecessary delay, or just call for serve. And then you're going to have an illegal replacement ultimately because you've either got a player in the wrong position or they're going to take that replacement after the whistle.
Very good.
But the best thing is to be preventative and have the R2 step down and remind them that they need to be watching and be ready to go in.
All right, so here's another question for you. As we have a timeout taken by Staley, 22 to 21 Northtown. And here's the thing. Here's another thing that we haven't talked about with R1 as well. Okay, so we talked about how R2 is going to, in the next match, watch for lineups, watch for front row, back row, that sort of thing. How important is it for the R1 to know who's front row and who's back row? They don't have a lineup card up there, so how are they going to know, and how important is that really?
It's important, but it's not as important for the R2 because the R1 can look to the R2 for help if they need it. But ideally, we would like the R1s to know who's front row and who's back row. Personally, when I'm scanning the court before each serve, I'm looking and observing who my back row players are. Other officials, they may do it the different way as to looking as to who's on the front row. But it's just up to each individual official as to how they want to do it.
Right, and I look for that as well. I think that's a big piece of my scanning, just an awareness piece of where everybody's at. I want to know that too. And then if I've got to look for if we've got something with a back row attack possibility, and knowing where the girls are at.
So if you notice, 13 for Staley on the right is a back row player, and she had a very tight ball she had to jump for and set the ball back towards her teammates. If she had dumped that ball, as we were just talking about, that would have been a back row attack. And that is something, as Dixie and Don said, that Nicole, even though she doesn't have a lineup card up there, she needs to at least be aware of so that she can call that back row attack. All right, it's 23-22 Northtown. Staley has the serve, but is down by 1. All right, we have a double contact. So how would you evaluate that call, Don?
Actually, I didn't see it.
Okay. Well, so what Nicole is looking for is she's looking for whether when the ball comes off the hands, if both hands come off at the same time. And in that case, the ball went from the left hand to the right hand very, very quickly. You kind of have to have an eye for these things, but she had the perfect angle because the setter was facing her, and so she was able to easily call that double contact. All right, we're down to set point here. Northtown has set point. And again, Don and Nicole have communicated that to one another. Don gave the set point signal to Nicole, and so now if Northtown scores this point, then they will win. And, nope, not yet. Excellent call by the line judge there. So if you noticed, I'm not sure if we got that, but the ball was contacted, went over the net, but went over the top or outside that antenna. The line judge called it, and Nicole accepted it and went with the signal there for an out of bounds. So any discussion there on the teamwork there that it takes to make that call?
I think it was a good call. It was close. She knew to look. If she hadn't and Don had seen that the line judge was making that call, I believe he could have whistled that as well to assist Nicole. If it were on the R2's side, it could be the R2 that actually that's going to whistle that call.
So teamwork in general, when you talk to your line judges before the match, what kind of things like that? That's kind of an unusual situation for a line judge a lot of times. We're used to having line judges call balls in and out on the lines and watching for touches. But line judges are also responsible for antenna violations like that. So kind of discuss the importance of making sure you have a good pregame with your line judges to talk about situations like that. What kind of things do you talk about with your line judges before the match, in particular with that situation?
I remind them that they are responsible for both antennas, because even if in the case where the ball is played from over here near the benches and is going toward the line judge that's on the R1 side, that far line judge is probably the one that has the best angle on it. And so even though they're furthest from it, we're going to be looking to them to make that call. Additionally, I'll remind them that they're responsible for their end line all the way across and their sideline all the way down. Because even though we're at center court, we've got other things that we're watching, or we don't have the same angle on the ball as the line judge does. So if that ball hits near the line, personally, I want the line judges to making a call on every one of those.
I do too. Every single time I tell them, I don't care if it hits the back wall or the middle of court, we want them to make a signal on their side.
Yeah, I'll tell them call it even if it's obvious to you, because
yes.
Like I said, we've got other things we're watching, or we can get blocked out as well.
Right. And I talked to them about flats, F-L-A-T-S as well too. So you've got the antenna that they do have to be able to see both antennas. Too many times we're about the antenna that's on their side, so to speak, and they need to be able to see both of them. As you stated, that line judge had the best angle for that to make that call.
Right.
One thing Don did as soon as the match was over as well too is he went to get the ball. Sometimes the ball doesn't always come to us, and the R2 typically will go get that ball and make sure we get it back to the score table instead of waiting for the match to start on the next one and wonder where the game ball is.
Right. Yeah, it's up to the officials really to secure that ball, because the players are going to be running around. The line judges probably aren't going to chase the ball down. It's a good idea that we secure the ball and get it back to the scorer's table.
Okay, very good. We're in between matches now. The coin flip is happening down on the floor there for Staley versus Oak Park. And a couple of things that kind of want to mention here before we start the next match is before you have your first match of the year, referees, okay, want to make sure that you have some things done, okay? So, for instance, what are some things, Don and Dixie, that you want to make sure that you have ready to go so that when you have your first match, you're in tip-top form, mid-season form, ready to go?
One thing I want to do is make sure my things are cleaned, fresh clean, and sometimes pressed, because you don't want to have your uniform top or your official's top and pants that you wear in the closet all year long, and then, oh yeah, I'm working tonight, and then you have them and they're wrinkled or they have hanger little marks on them, so that's not a very good representation, professionalism on yourself when you show up that way.
And before that, you have to play the game of, does this still fit? To make
Very
sure,
good.
because especially if you don't work in the off season, if it was last October or November when you last put these things on, they may or may not fit.
Yeah, whether it's too large or too small, but just making sure it fits appropriately. Very good. You know, another thing I think that's important too is to watch yourself. The best way to see if you're making good signals is to watch yourself in a mirror. And it doesn't matter how many years you've been officiating, you still need to see yourself to make sure you're doing everything correctly. And so just like calling for serve, one of the biggest things we do, and making sure that that arm is held out to your side and not at a 90-degree angle, which is not appropriate. So watch yourself.
Right. It's a good idea to review not only the rules that became new this year, but also even the last year or two, because if you've been doing it as long as I have, then sometimes you forget.
A couple
which
years,
rules,
Don?
A few. You may forget some of the things that they just changed just last year or the year before. So it's a good idea to review not only the current new rules, but also the last year or two as well.
Right, right. Read through that in the case book. And it doesn't matter if you've been working as long as Don Sleet has or myself, you know, much less. It doesn't matter. You still need to review those rules and read the rule book. It's very important. Every year, read the rule book and the case book.
Yeah. And if you work USA or college or anything like that, make sure to review the change in how it's different between high school and those other rule codes.
Absolutely.
There are rules that are significantly different, such as the contact with the net and with the center line.
Right, right.
And to your point about watching yourself in the mirror, it might not even be a bad idea to buddy up with another official. Have them come out, they film you for a match, and then you return the favor and you exchange the tapes where you can watch how you look on camera.
True.
Because there's things that I know I film matches that I'm working in that other officials work, and there's things that I catch myself doing that I don't realize that I'm doing until I see it on video.
Very good. Okay, it looks like we're about ready to go here for our second match between Staley and Oak Park. Now, in the first match, our focus was on Nicole as R1, and we tried to keep a lot of our comments to that. But now we're going to focus down on Don Guard and R2. Okay, and so there's a lot of things that R2 is responsible for, the second referee, that the first referee isn't. And so there's many people who would say that even the job of the second referee is more difficult than the job of the first referee. I know that probably the average person will just look and, well, the first referee makes all the calls. R2 just stands there and does nothing. Well, that's probably furthest from the truth as possible. Would you guys agree?
Judgment-wise, I'd say the R1 has a lot more responsibilities. Administrative-wise and keeping the match flowing is more up on the R2. And so a good R2 can make or break a match.
That is for sure. So
I agree. I think the R2 probably is a harder role because you have the coaches on the left and right side of you as well too.
Oftentimes it's
chatter.
Oftentimes if the R1 makes a ball handling call, it's the R2's rear end that gets in a sling with the coach, not the R1. So
correct. I think Don Guard, who is our R2 tonight, said it's a good time to lose weight if you want to, possibly.
All right, so here we go. We're starting the second match here. And we talked in the first match about how Don went ahead and checked lineups, identified the captain, let the libero enter. So we've talked about all that. So now let's kind of focus in on what he does during the match. So notice he's walking or moving from side to side. We didn't really see that because of the missed serve. Okay, but notice if we get kind of a longer rally. Well, here's a substitution. So Don, as soon as the player enters the sub zone, meaning beyond the 10-foot line, that means that that team has a sub request. Is that the only way that a team can make a sub request?
No, the head coach can also ask for substitution.
Okay, so once that happens, then Don blows his whistle and indicates substitution. And then as we mentioned earlier, they wait until the scorekeeper has it. So here, we'll have another substitution here. Don turns to the scorekeeper, indicates the numbers. Once the scorekeeper has it, then he releases them and then gives the court back to Nicole to the R1 so that R1 can blow for beckon of service.
Now, Don doesn't maintain a lineup card, but if you are maintaining a lineup card, you should make sure you have what you want to write down done first before you hand back the court back to the first referee.
All right, we have a net violation. I'm sorry, Don, I didn't mean to cut you off. We had a net violation there, so that notice the signal sequence, okay? When Don initiates a call from the second referee position, what does he signal first?
He's going to whistle and make sure he's on the offending team's side. Then he's going to signal the nature of the fault, and if it's a net fault, he's going to offer the number of the offender to the R1.
And again, the R1 in that scenario only does what?
She'll award the point and then repeat the number of the offender back to the R1, or excuse me, back to the coach.
So when the R2 initiates a call, the R1, I mean, we want the R2 to mimic the R1 signals, but when the R2 initiates the call, R1 does not mimic the signals.
That's right. Only if there's a question, if they're looking at you, nobody saw the signal, then it's okay to offer what the false signal was. Very
good. Anything to add, Dixie, on that? Or?
All's good.
All right, excellent. So now what we were trying to say earlier is if we have a longer rally, we want watch Don and how he moves during the rally. So notice he moves from one side of the set to the other, one side of the net to the other. And he's doing that again right there.
And he
so
keeps
he's going
focus with the ball as well, and then he moves his attention then to the net.
Yeah, and notice which side of the net is he on? Is he on the ball side or the other side?
He's striving to be on the blocker's side.
And why is that important? Why does the R2 want to be on the blocker side?
Because that's where your defensive players are going to be coming and where most of your net faults are going to happen. The R1 is primarily responsible for net faults on the attacker. The R2 is going to be watching from the blocker's side. But if the ball is going back and forth quickly, then the R2 needs to stay on one side instead of ping-ponging back and forth.
So let's do this. Let's have our camera one. If we could have camera one focused on the down ref, on Don, and just kind of isolate on him. So if we can just kind of focus on that, and I hope that's on the air. Yeah, camera one looks like it's on. So camera one, just focus on Don and just kind of watch him for a couple of plays and what he does. So he's mimicking Nicole's signals. Here's a substitution now. And notice he signals to the subs with an open hand and kind of a motion towards the court to let the subs know it's time for them to enter and exit. A lot of times early in the season, substitutes just kind of run on the court whenever they feel like it. So what's the importance of preventing them from doing that?
We need to make sure that they're not running on their own, because if they do, for one thing, if the R2 didn't see the substitution, like earlier we talked about having them on both sides, they could get on without you knowing it. They need to be in the habit of waiting until they're released.
Okay, here we go. Don has just called an overlap. So now what will happen is Candy McCall, the coach from Oak Park, oftentimes will come over and say, which players was it, or which player was the overlap? And
she wants to correct them so that that doesn't occur again.
Hopefully.
And she did speak to him. So another thing, also, when Don signals for the substitution, he waits until the player has crossed the 10-foot line, the 3-meter line, whatever your preference is. You don't want to call it as soon as they come running up from the bench, because it's really not the substitution time until they've crossed that 10-foot line. So be cautious with that. Don't get in a hurry because if they haven't entered it and you've blown the whistle, they don't have to sub.
Right. Additionally, sometimes you'll see the outgoing player come to the sideline yelling sub, sub, sub. That also is not a valid request for sub. It's a key that you should be watching that there's probably a sub coming up.
Correct.
But we shouldn't be whistling that either.
Right. The only time you'd want to blow it before that person was up there is when, if the coach says sub, it's going to be a sub. But if the kids are doing it, wait till they get up there. But that's a great point because usually it is the person on the court that's waiting there for the person off the court to come up. Be patient, officials. Be patient. Again, Don watches the receiving team, the ball, and then he then gets back to the net.
So it's 17-all. I haven't even mentioned the score in a long time. 17-all here between Staley and Oak Park in the first set of 2 between these two schools. And again, if you're just tuning in, this is the Volleyball Jamboree to start the season. And each team, there's 4 teams here. Winnetonka, Northtown, Oak Park, and Staley, and each team is playing one another in just 2 sets. We actually have a second gym going where the other matches are happening, but we're only focusing here on the main gym matches. And right now, Staley and Oak Park are playing. Oak Park just took an 18-17 lead.
I don't know if we saw that, but that was a case where we had an attempted pancake, and Don saw it coming and was able to offer help, and he discreetly signaled that the ball was down in case Nicole was unable to see it.
This is a great opportunity for our young ladies in the district to get some preseason jitters out and coaches to see what they've got and work on lineups and not worry about wins or losses because that really doesn't matter, although we all love to win.
So a few plays ago, Don called an overlap, called an illegal lineup. And so later on, maybe even in this match or the next match, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to talk about overlaps and what you're watching for. We'll have the camera, not right now, but in a little bit when I kind of talk about it later, we'll have the camera focus in on the lineup and maybe the rotations and just kind of take a look and see what possible situations there we could have overlap. So I don't want anyone to think that we're just ignoring Don's overlap call there, but we're going to kind of discuss that in more detail later on in the match and what was actually called there. Okay, so timeout just happened. Whose whistle is it to initiate the timeout?
The request for the timeout.
So the coach is probably going to come up to the R2 and request the timeout. And then what happens to end the timeout? What is the whistle, horn, signal sequence to end the timeout?
If the teams are still in the huddle after 45 seconds, then the R2 double whistles to warn the teams that the timeout is about over. And then when either both teams return to the court or at the end of 60 seconds, whichever happens first, then there's a horn to formally end the timeout. It's at that point then that the R2 signals how many each team has used and returns the court back to the R1.
Why is it how many each team has used instead of how many each team has taken?
I don't know that.
Well, the thing is, the reason I mention that is not to confuse anybody, but just to know that in some sports, especially if officials are watching from other sports, it's usually the other way around, how many timeouts you have left. But in volleyball, just make sure that if you're officiating a match, we're always talking in terms of how many timeouts a team has already taken. So if you display the number 2 in terms of timeout to a coach, that means they're out of timeouts. So make sure you're aware of that in case you weren't previously.
And one thing I will tell officials when I'm observing is don't give the coach conflicting signals. Don't signal the 2 and then turn and signal a 0 back to when you remind them that they're out of timeouts. Just if you want to say, coach, that's your last timeout, that's fine. And we have another out of rotation. I think this might be the same one we had last time.
Another overlap. Coach Candy is trying to get some clarification. She's processing with Dawn. She then corrected her gals on the court.
So I notice we're going to camera 3 a little bit with the first referee. We can probably focus more on camera 2. We don't really need to see camera 3 up on the first referee. Hopefully camera 3 is now actually going with the action. We need camera 1 to be focused on the second referee down on the floor. Cameras 2 and 3 we want focused on the action. So I just kind of took a sneak peek here at the live stream on my phone, and we can do away with camera 3, only focused on the first referee.
We talked earlier about Don's positioning and the transition. Notice that he's not in a hurry to switch. He waits for the players to come back down to the court before he makes his switch.
Time out, and he's now talking with his table, making sure everything is okay, and making sure everything looks good from their side if they had needed any help. He is now scanning the court too. I know he looked at his R1. Didn't look like they had any communication needed.
Okay, so let's watch Don here end the time. Park. And Staley just put it away, so now they're up by 2. And so as we get closer to the end of a set, what are the kind of things that R2 needs to be thinking about? What's Don thinking about right now that he'll need to kind of do as we get towards the end of the set?
He needs to be listening back to the scorer's table to make sure. And once we have the 24th point on the board,
which is happening right now.
Okay, he should be, unless he's hearing from the scorekeeper, he should be turning back to verify that we are actually at set point before he signals the set point to Nicole.
Because sometimes the scorekeeper and the clock keeper don't have their numbers together.
Right. So just because we've got 24 on the board, we need to be checking with the scorer to make sure before making that signal, because we don't want to find out the score is wrong once we got 25 and we've whistled them off.
And so now we've just had the end of the set, and again, Nicole switches the sides, and now Don is doing what? What's Don doing right now?
He's collected the lineup sheets, and he's handing them to the coaches so that they don't have to worry about coming to get them.
Right.
Just like the coaches give them to the R2 at the beginning of the set, the R2 should be gathering them and returning them back to the coaches. It's not mandated, but it's a good practice.
Right, absolutely.
All right, so now we're between sets of our match here between Staley and Oak Park. And how do you think well, actually, not to evaluate what's going on, but what is the importance of the eye contact that the second referee has with the first referee during the match, during subs, during timeouts, during between sets like this? What is the importance of eye contact between R1 and R2?
The R2 can help the R1 to know whether they think that the match is going too fast or too slow. You were talking about pacing earlier. They can, through eye contact or simple gestures, to let them know they either need to slow down, or I don't think I've ever heard of anyone saying speed up. But if there's any kind of potential problems, they may need to communicate that. You were talking about the scanning the court. Another thing you also need to be cognizant of, as both officials, is if there's any type of animosity between the players watching during the dead ball for any kind of unsporting acts. That may be something that during a timeout or in between sets, the R2 may want to go over and talk to the R1, make sure that they're on the same page. If the R2 is given some type of warning to a coach, maybe they're hitting too many comments about ball handling or anything like that, let the R1 know so that they're not totally surprised if the R2 does end up calling for a card.
I think it's very good, too, for the R2 to give a thumbs up to the R1 that good things are happening as well, that they feel that they're making great judgment calls. And
Yeah, if there's a tough judgment call, giving them a nod saying
Yeah.
good call, that you were on the same page with them. It's a good idea.
just because we all know as an R1, we process everything through our heads when we call it, and there are times you're going, man, did I make the right call? Everybody goes through that, whether you have Don's years of experience or mine. You always wonder.
Yeah.
You will process things. That's just part of becoming better and reflecting, just as we do as lifelong learners.
Sometimes that's the only positive reinforcement you get, right?
Very good. Yes.
Well, as we get started here for the second set, Don just blew the whistle to end the interval between sets. And when does that happen again?
Unless there's any kind of special promotion, it's 3 minutes long, and then after 2 minutes and 45 seconds is the warning whistle. Once both teams are on the court or the end of the 3 minutes, that's when there should be a horn. The lineups were due to the second referee by the time after 2 minutes have elapsed, or with 1 minute remaining in the interval. If there's some type of special promotional thing, a senior night or a Dig for the Cure event, they may extend that to 5 minutes, but that has to be decided before the match starts.
Yeah, that's not a last-minute decision. Hey, we're going to go ahead and have our 5-minute intermission. But then the protocol about the 1 minute having the lineup in is still the same.
Okay. I don't know if the cameras are picking this up. Maybe camera one can take a look at what's going on down here, but it looks like we have another lineup issue. Don may have caught another person that was listed on the lineup sheet that was not out there. So again, we had a little issue with Staley earlier. Looks like that may not have been resolved, and so now Don's making sure that the correct 6 players are out there for Staley. And then now checking Oak Park. And then again, the ball has been returned to the scorer's table for Don to roll out to the first server. And now once everybody's ready, Don's satisfied with the lineups. The right server has the ball. Don gives the court to Nicole, and we're off and running. And coaches love it when we have the first serve of the set be a missed serve. Just so, am I right, Dixie? Dixie and I were former coaches, so we love it when that happens, right?
I did not. You have 100% control of that ball. It's got to go in the court.
See, look, there's still a lot of coach in you there, Dixie.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we have a double substitution. In other words, 2 subs on the same side. And notice each one happens separately. You don't have them both happen simultaneously. One sub is in the sub zone. The other one waits outside the sub zone. When the first one is done and Don and the scorekeeper are satisfied that that one's over with and they've been released, then the other sub slides into the sub zone, and then they get taken care of and allowed to enter and exit the match. So again, take your time on these subs. There's no reason to be in a hurry, especially early in the season when we're trying to get things all figured out, making sure that your scorekeepers might not be as experienced sometimes early in the season. And there's no reason we should be going too fast so that the scorekeepers are allowed the time to do their jobs.
And unless you suspect something's wrong, you as the R2 can go ahead and release the sub to go in. Just don't turn the court back over to the R1 until you're confident that the scorer and the Libero tracker have it written down.
That's a great point, Don. A lot of people, I think, forget about that, especially new referees, because they think they have to wait until everybody is everything's hunky-dory, the numbers are in the book, and everybody, and you have your lineup card updated before you can release them onto the court. You don't. You just have to remember the 2 players that are entering and exiting, and then and you can let them go and just make sure you've got the right numbers on your card and the scorekeeper has the right numbers, and then immediately you're ready to play. You don't have to wait for them to exchange and do whatever they need to do after the exchange or after the substitution happens.
Right, because if there is something illegal about the substitution, the penalty's the same whether they're still standing in the zone or you've released them. Where the penalty can change is if you've had a serve.
All right, now we have an overrule. I'm not sure if the camera got that. Let's focus. I know this is R2, but let's focus on R1. So the line judge called the ball in, and Nicole, if you didn't catch it on camera, shook her head at the line judge, and then she overruled and called the ball out. So, Dixie, what are you going to say about that?
It was definitely out, and Nicole was aware of that. The line judge called the ball before it actually landed. So she was signaling out, and the ball hadn't even landed.
Another thing that happened when you were discussing that is we had a potential illegal libero replacement. The libero exited, and the incoming player was awfully close to that sub-zone. If Don had seen it, that would have been a good opportunity to remind them to move it further down the line.
And just early in the season, when you have weird things like that happen, you know, it's much better at this point of the season, especially early first couple weeks of the season, to be preventative, warn as much as possible. Mm-hmm. You know, later on in the season, hopefully they should know better by then, and by the time we get to postseason, obviously, you know, the warnings will become less and less, and the penalties will become more and more. So early in the season, try and be helpful as a referee, and make sure that they learn the right way to do it before you start penalizing them later in the season.
Yeah.
Right. Those simple reminders go a long ways.
Nicole shook her head on that line call by the line judge, and indicating she agreed with that and went with it and awarded the ace serve to Oak Park. 16-14 is the score. Staley up by 2 here. So Oak Park is serving.
And that's good that Nicole gave positive reinforcement to the line judges as well, letting them know that they made a good call. The thumbs up. I like to give them a thumbs up.
Okay, and we have another overrule here. Ball that went long was again called in by the line judge. So if you have, and again, obviously our line judges are volunteers, are, you know, sometimes players, sometimes parents, depending on the level of play and so forth. And, you know, we're not trying to, you know, disparage any line judges here, but, you know, that's twice now that line judge has been overruled. As a first referee, is there anything that you can do, maybe at a timeout between sets, something, because, you know, during a timeout or between sets, sometimes the line judge comes over to where you're at. Is there anything you can do as a referee to help out your line judge if they're maybe struggling a little bit?
Yeah, they are supposed to come over during the timeout, and especially in this case, I would make sure that they do, that we could discuss, ask them if they have any questions. Maybe they're confused as to whether or not the lines are in or out. Maybe they're watching the ball instead of looking ahead to watching the floor and seeing that the ball hit it. And if it comes down to it, the first referee does have the prerogative to have a line judge replaced. But I've done this 35 years, and I don't know that I've ever had that happen. But it is something they can do if it does get to be too bad.
We do sometimes have line judges that it's very hard to pay attention, especially if they're younger. They're wanting to watch the match instead of watching the ball. So then I've seen some replacements at the end of sets.
Okay. And I've seen where sometimes the line judges switch on their own. It's not an ideal situation because I think we had a serve before the whistle for serve.
Oh, she's talking to her line judge.
Yes, the server is in the zone nearest the line judge. She's in the near third, and so we want the line judge to move laterally, to not be on the sideline or up on the corner, but be in position to see if foot fault if one occurs.
And that's kind of a new mechanic this year, isn't it, Don?
In the past, it was up to the first referee which direction they wanted them to go. The new mechanic this year is that they can only move laterally. They no longer move in line with the sideline.
I'm not very smart, Don. What does laterally mean?
In line, staying in line with the end line.
Okay. So moving sideways instead of backwards.
Yes. And we
Now
never want them going diagonal.
Lateral in your math classes?
Okay, if we could get camera 1 to focus back down on Don, I want to bring up one thing. And while they're doing that, I think, Don, you're going to say something?
I was going to say this is a case where the ball was hit in the tape, and Don was offering Nicole 4 hits to let her know from his position he did not see the ball being blocked. It's up to Nicole whether she wants to take that or not. And in this case, she did.
Okay, so let's have camera 1. Can we get camera 1 to focus on Don down at on the floor there? Okay. So I want to talk about proximity for Don. How, Don, what do you guys think about how far Don is away from the court when he works? And is there a difference if you work closer to the court? Because, obviously you're not on the stand. The first referee has to stay where the first referee is. But Don has some latitude on movement, close to the court, far away from the court, in front of the scorer's table, away from the scorer's table. Kind of evaluate what Don is doing, and if there's any advantage, closer, farther away, and evaluate what he's doing.
Farther back gives you a wider peripheral view, so if you're not actively following the ball, you're going to be aware of when the ball is going to be headed toward the net. Also, the defensive team, you're going to be seeing them in a different posture when the ball is near them. In this case, there was a potential for an antenna call, and so Don moved out to the sideline to help him to get a better view on that. Personally, I stay back. I like the basketball sideline. That gives me a good reference where I know I'm in a consistent position.
Right.
Maybe a step forward or backward as I need to, but generally I just move left and right. I don't go out toward the court very often.
And he's done a little bit of both.
He has.
Yeah, but, I've had some conversations with coaches on that, too, and they're like, why does the officials want to stand so far back? They're 30 feet across to get to the other side, but, we do have a better view, I think, a little bit further away. Sometimes we don't have a choice. There are certain schools that you don't have a lot of room to back up because the table's right there.
Right. And if you're ever in that situation, if there's room to move the table back, it doesn't hurt to ask them to move it. What we don't want to be is up hugging the post where you're too close and you can't see anything.
(22-19), Staley Oak Park has just taken timeout. They're down by 3.
Signal the timeout. He does look up at the scoreboard because he wants to make sure that the clock is running for the timeout. Sometimes we turn around and we're focused on the table, and then we're not, and then the clock, the timeout is not running. So you want to make sure that 60 seconds is started too.
Not only that, but also the R2 can verify some other things with the scorer's table. Like, for instance, the score. Is the score, what's up on the scoreboard, the same thing as what's in the scorebook? And that's a good time to verify. What are some other things that Don is probably doing right now during a timeout that they can talk about with the people at the scorer's table?
They should be verifying that the Libero tracker, with the Libero tracker, whether the Libero is in the set or not, how many timeouts each team has used, depending on how close we're getting to the end of the set, making sure that the scorer has checked everything, verifying the number of subs. If a coach is getting close to 15, which is when we're supposed to start cautioning them as to how many subs they've used. And since I maintain with my lineup card, I'm verifying that my sub count matches theirs.
Correct. Don just isn't doing that, but he has to check since he's not keeping a card. He does check. He needs no substitutions.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. Is that legal? Can Don do that? Can he not keep a card?
Yeah, it's entirely up to him. Under high school mechanics, the only thing he's required to do is have his card to go out and check the lineups prior to each set. Beyond that, there's nothing in the book that says what they have to. There's suggested or things offered that they could potentially keep. Another thing is, and some officials like to do this, we don't want the officials keeping score on their card. It takes your attention away from what you need to be watching during the match, during the dead balls, trying to keep track of the score. if you need practice with your card, I suggest going. Okay, we just had a situation here. The substitute came up. She got into the zone, and Don whistled it, and then she tried to retreat.
Okay.
And so I think what he's doing is explaining to Candy why he whistled and then giving her the opportunity. She can either follow through with substitution or she can take the unnecessary delay penalty, which is just an administrative yellow card.
Yeah, which
And-
is
and
what
that's the route
she's
she
doing
took.
then, given that.
So this is good. This is good. We haven't had this happen in our live streams before. So we actually have a administrative yellow card. And so what is Don doing to the scores with the scorer now to make sure that gets recorded properly? What is he doing there?
He just reported to the scorer that we had an administrative yellow card for Oak Park, making sure that she's writing it down in the comments section. And then once she's verified that, he's turned it back over to Nicole.
So a common misconception on that is that if the sub comes up and is whistled, and the second referee actually whistles it, they don't have to follow through and complete the substitution. Is that correct?
That's correct. They can withdraw it and take the unnecessary delay. Now, to the point that Dixie made earlier, if Don had whistled that too soon, if the girl wasn't up in the zone yet, you would let him retract it without any kind of penalty.
Correct. Yeah, because we do. Sometimes when we get in the flow of the game, and that's part of that wanting to get things completed, but we've got to be patient.
Right.
Good, we can talk about this some more because the match just ended between Staley and Oak Park, and so we have a few minutes now to kind of discuss the ins and outs of that a little bit before they start the final match here. So let's kind of expand on what happened there. So Candy McCall, the Oak Park coach, she was allowed the option to either complete the sub, okay, or to retract the sub and take the unnecessary delay penalty, which in this case was an administrative yellow card. And again, remember, unnecessary delay is no longer, this was a couple years ago, is no longer an automatic timeout. So it's just a yellow card, nothing hurt, no points are awarded or anything like that. It's just a yellow card. And Don, as you saw hopefully earlier, how did Don administer that? What was the signal for an administrative yellow card?
He whistled to make sure that Nicole was focused on him. He took the yellow card out of his pocket, held the arm on the offending team's side, pointed toward the ceiling, held the yellow card against that wrist, and then dropped the wrist that was upright toward the floor, toward the court. And then Nicole mirrored that with the same signal, the hand on the offending team's side pointing up toward the ceiling, and the yellow card then placed on the wrist.
Very good.
One point of emphasis with an administrative yellow card, that is not a requirement for the coach to have to sit on the bench either. So it's administrative yellow card versus an unsporting yellow card, two different things. So the coach, Candy, would not have to have remained seated for
That's
the rest
correct.
of that
That's a
set.
great point.
Yeah. And another difference in the cards is that you can actually get an administrative yellow card in each set. They don't carry forward. If it had happened the second time during the same set, it would have been an administrative red card. The mechanics are the same except for with the red card, but additionally in that case there'd be a point awarded.
Very good. Okay, anything else that has happened here in the first two matches that we really haven't expanded upon before we kind of tackle some maybe other topics here?
I think we talked about it earlier on the substitutions about how when they come up on both sides, the good communication with one side to let them know that you're going to administer the other side first. Kind of goes back to what we talked about them running on. Let them know. If they do happen to run on in that case, you just bring them back and just remind them that they need to wait till they're released. Administratively, I think everything on the match has been going very smoothly. Probably
I
just
agree.
jinxed them.
I think they've had very good control, very consistent, very relaxed, not in a hurry, either one of them.
Right.
Sometimes when we try to make too quick of calls, the coaches don't see what we're calling. Slow down, be patient. Let the coaches be sure of what you're calling, and then that's a confidence piece in what you're doing as well, too.
So here's what's going to happen now. We've got the third match coming up between Staley and Winnetonka. both teams have played 2 matches, and they're not really going to want to warm up here, and they're just ready to do. They just did the coin flip and ready to go. Now notice Don. We're going to switch. Don is going to go up, and Nicole's going to go down. Remember, R1 is responsible for briefing the line judges. Oftentimes, this happens at tournaments where you only have about 5 minutes between matches, and you've got to brief the line judges very quickly. And so what Don is doing right now is trying to give his about 2-minute line judge speech, which, again, is very helpful to have. You know, obviously you have your longer, more detailed line judge speech that you can give before the match when there's a 16-minute warm-up. But when we only have about 5 minutes in between matches and you have to administer a lot of other things between matches, it's really good to have your very succinct 2 or 3 minute line judge speech, and I think that's what Don just did there. So any comments on that?
Chances are she's been line judging in the other court, so he probably started off by asking what her experience was and then hit the highlights, reminding her about where she's supposed to move when the server's near her. Hopefully he told her to put her phone away. She has it out right now.
You know, and that's one thing, too, that we'll get people that have had lots of experience, and they let us know that. But I still think it's important every time to go through your expectations of the line judges, even though they know everything because they've done it for years. Mm-hmm. They still need to work with them and then understand your expectations.
Okay, so now we've switched positions. Don is the first referee. Nicole's the second referee, and we're not going to really focus on one versus the other. We're just going to kind of see what happens. But the first thing we want to notice is differences in technique, differences in style between Don and Nicole. Not to say that any one is better than the other, but since we're all human beings, we all have differences in how we do things. So we're going to see if there's any differences in the way Don handles being a first referee and Nicole handles being a second referee. So in particular, Don and how he stands up on the stands, his signals from up there, and then from down below with Nicole, you know, her distance from the court, the way she administers substitutions and timeouts, and those sorts of things, we're going to kind of see the differences. So as we get going here, while Nicole's checking lineups, and again, Nicole, I believe she does use a card versus Don not using a card during the matches. So when we have substitutions with Nicole, you'll see her actually marking things on her card, and we'll kind of maybe talk about that as we go along. But if you're just tuning in, Don Sleet is the MSHA mechanics interpreter and observer for the Kansas City area. I'm Dixie Westcott is the MSHA rules interpreter for the Kansas City area. My name is Ken Corum. I'm the Vice President of Volleyball for the Greater Kansas City Officials Association, and we're happy to bring this broadcast of looking at the match here from a referee's point of view to you here on YouTube. So what we've got here now is the third match between Staley and Oak Park going. Staley just won the first point, 11-10. Remember, we're playing to 15. And we're starting at 10-10, going to 25, win by 2. So Don being the observer for our area, and again, we'll kind of expand on this a little bit more too, but what are the kind of things as an observer, Don, that, and again, you know, I didn't mean for you to, I don't want you to have to expand on this entirely, but what are the kind of things that generally speaking you look for when you go into a gym to observe referees?
The main things are the consistency of the calls and that they're appropriate for the skill level of the players. Oftentimes, you might see, especially in a junior high match, where there's no ball handling calls made when there are some obvious ball handling faults that should be called because the players are not going to get any better and the coaches aren't going to be happy with just a traffic cop up there calling for serve and awarding points when the ball hits the floor.
And of course, Don Gard obliged you just now by calling a double contact in the middle of you discussing ball handling consistency. So well done by Don Gard. Good job.
He heard you.
Yes.
Don Sleet.
Grading the skill level of the players, that's something that we are going to be watching during the warm-ups and judging and trying to, in our own minds, to set that threshold as to what's going to be called legal and what's illegal during the night.
So we just had a double substitution, in other words, a substitution on each side. And Nicole whistled the first substitution, but she did not whistle the substitution on the other side. Is that okay?
Yes, because once she has the court, when she called that first substitution, it's hers until she gives the court back to him. If she had returned the court and then the other substitution came up, she would need to whistle again to take the court back from the first referee.
Now here we got an interesting situation. Staley got the kill off the block, but Nicole, as the R2, blew the whistle for a center line violation. In other words, before the ball was dead, Nicole saw the hitter actually step over the center line. And so she called that, and there was a little confusion, but Don immediately recognized that, accepted the call, and awarded the ball to Winnetonka. Did you want to talk about that?
Well, I'm a little confused as to what happened because at first it looked like Don was overruling the line judge, and then he reversed himself. I'm wondering if it was an antenna call?
Yeah, it was an antenna violation.
Okay.
The line judge gave the antenna fault signal.
Okay.
And I think Don just pointed the wrong way.
Correct.
So
he just pointed the wrong way, then he patted himself, his error,
Yeah.
and then awarded the point correctly. And that's something, too, that it's okay if you make a mistake. Roll with it. Know you made it, admit it, and move on. It's okay. We're human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anytime we make a mistake, we want to fix as best we can as long as the rules allow for it.
So what do you think of Don's pacing so far? How are his signals the same or different than anything that Nicole was doing when she was up on the stand?
I think they're both doing a really good job. Nice, clear signals. They're coming to a stop and holding them. They're not just flashing them up and moving on to the next one. So everybody has a good opportunity to see what the call was.
Right. Don is very patient in his calls. I've worked with him several times, and it's always a joy to work with him because we're both very slow about making our calls, not in a hurry, very similar in that. So very, very clear, very crisp, and very confident in his calls. And that's good.
In full disclosure here that that both Don and Nicole have been have worked multiple state tournaments, and so they bring a wealth of experience to not only tonight's teaching scenario and bringing some teachable moments to us here, but also to the Greater Kansas City Officials Association in general. And we're very proud that they're here tonight representing our association and doing a great job here at the Jamboree at Staley. I don't know if the camera caught that, but Nicole kind of did a little two-step there as she was awarding the point. Discuss that. Why did she step over to the side of the team that committed the fault? Why is that a thing?
When she's mirroring the R1's call, it's preferable that the R2 be on the offending team's side. It's not really a requirement. It looks better. If she's the one initiating the call, then it is a requirement that she get onto the offending team's side before offering the fault signal.
Then if she's on the offending team's side, she's where she should be for the serve receive on that as well.
And then also something, too, that you can pre-match and talk about as an R1, R2. Sometimes there's confusion. A ball can be rattling around on the net or something weird happens, and it's not clear to the R1 which team should be awarded the point. If the R2 knows and stands on the side of the offending team, you can kind of give a little informal, discreet message, maybe with your eyes or maybe just by where you're standing, that if you're standing on one side, then, yeah, you should award the point to the other team. So, again, that's very high-level communication, nonverbal communication, that if you can pregame and have worked with someone a lot in the past, that's something that could be an advantage if you know how to do that.
You know, though, that also, even if they don't have a lot of experience, but your more experienced official is the R2, and then you have the R1 that's gaining experience, it could help them as well, too, knowing that you go to the offending side. Could help guide them as well.
Very good.
One thing that is important, though, is that the R2 should be mirroring the signal given by the R1, even if it's not the correct signal. It would create even more confusion if both officials were giving different signals, especially like on a touch out situation. And it's something then that the officials would want to talk about afterward, that the R2 may say what they believe what the proper signal was.
What if it's as blatant as the R1 awarding the point to the wrong team? Is there something the R2 should be doing in that situation? You just said you have to mimic no matter what, but is there something that the R2 should do in that scenario when it's very blatant that the signal was wrong?
That's a case where if I were the R2, I would probably be getting on the offending team's side and kind of shaking my head subtly no to the R1 and maybe starting to lead them to signal the point the other direction. And hopefully then they'll pick up on it. And if not, we may need to come together because maybe they have something else that they were calling, and we can get together and get on the same page to make sure that we're getting the point to the right side.
And that happens. Sometimes you do have to, R2 needs to go over to the stand and have a discussion for clarity and then come back and explain to the coaches sometimes if necessary.
So notice at the scorers table we have 2 game balls, and what just happened there was one game ball kind of got away, and Nicole threw out the other game ball so that the first game ball, they're not relying on that ball to come back in case you wanted to keep the match going. Like some gyms, it's not a big deal because there isn't a whole lot of free space around the court, but here at Staley, if you haven't been able to tell, there's quite a bit of free space where a ball could get trapped under a bleacher very easily or go around a corner, go in the hallway, and you've got that second ball there. So a lot of times the second referee, since they're right there, is responsible for making sure the match keeps going and you're not wasting an extra 30 seconds to a minute waiting for that ball to return. So that's another thing that the R2 has to be responsible for, is making sure that the pace of the match is appropriate so that you can keep the thing going in case we do have a missing ball or something of that nature. So
Ken, with that too, there's sometimes the ball gets stuck in the ceiling as well too, and you've got to be able to have that.
Well, what
extra
happens
ball.
in that? So what if I hit a ball and shank it and it goes straight in the ceiling and stays there? What's the call?
So it's still playable when it comes down. If it were to come down, it's still playable as long as they have 3 contacts. However, if it hits the ceiling and goes over, it is out of play.
Now, if it goes up and becomes lodged, if it was a third hit, then it's out. But if it's the first or second hit, then as long as it stays on that team's side, then it's going to end up being a replay.
Yeah. We hardly ever see that, but it does happen. I've seen it a couple of times in the years I've been officiating. So, yeah, most of the time it's going to be a replay unless the situations occur that Don just outlined.
Back to your point about the ball getting away, though. It's important to stress to the line judges that they are officials of the game. They are not to chase down the balls. It's ultimately up to the players to get it, or usually here at Staley, since they have such a big area, they have ball shaggers that will chase down the ball, and in that case, you can go ahead and throw a new ball in. But the line judges need to stay on the corners.
That's an excellent point, because a lot of times we do have players that don't fulfill that responsibility. They expect other people to go get the ball for them when it's really their number one responsibility in between plays is to make sure that ball gets back to where it's supposed to. Now, so obviously if the ball ends up on that team's side and they're supposed to shag it, probably they're the team that lost the point. And so what if they take forever because they want to delay, they want to upset the team who just won the point, those sorts of things. So what if that starts occurring and becomes a problem? What do we do in those scenarios?
I think that's a case where the R1 needs to call the captain over and let them know that they are responsible for chasing after the ball, and any further delays could be considered an administrative delay.
Okay, so while we're talking about all that, hey, Staley won that set. They won 25-20. And so now we're switching to the second set, and this will be our final set. And I'm kind of wanting to alert the truck. I know that the camera people cannot hear me, but I'm just alerting the truck. I want to try something. I did not clear this with you all ahead of time. so I'm kind of directing from up here. What I'd like to do is take camera 1, and when we start this second set, I want them to just focus on the team on that side of the net and just show all 6 players on that side of the net and just stay on that team for until I say different. So when we start the set, can we have camera 1 on and just stay on the team just on that side of the net? And what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and look at their rotations and kind of look at potential overlaps and look at that team on that side. So hopefully the truck heard me, and we can do that when we start this last set. All right, I just had to go talk to the director here a little bit and make sure that we can get that scenario, because we're going to watch some overlap potential here on the team on the near side of camera 1, which will be on our left. So Winnetonka, we're going to watch them for their rotations and see if we can see any potential situations where there could be an overlap. Obviously, Winnetonka's coach, Mike Espinoza, will never intentionally put a lineup out there that would be an overlap. He would never, ever do that. He's such a good coach that he would never, ever allow his team to overlap.
Mike might be a little bit sneaky once in a while. You know, he's a Missouri Hall of Famer volleyball coach, was inducted last year.
How many wins does Mike Espinoza have?
Well, last year he got his 500th win, so 500 plus more. But there was a big celebration for that at Winnetonka as well.
Not only are we really, really, really fortunate in Kansas City to have excellent officials, but also we have among the best coaches in the state as well, and frankly in the nation. There's a lot of great talented volleyball players due in large part to the wonderful high school programs that we have here in the state of Missouri. So we're very, very lucky. The state of volleyball is in a very good place in this part of the nation.
I ditto that. There are many, many wonderful coaches that produce great athletes.
Okay, so if we could get camera 1 to just focus on the team on the left side. Right now, okay, so number 11 looks to be our setter here. Number 11 looks to be our setter here, and I believe that person is left back. So we have a back row setter for Winnetonka right now. So let's go back and look at that formation, you guys. We have 11 is most likely a back row setter. 6 is probably left front. 9 is probably right front. And again, we don't have the lineups on hand here. We're just we're not guessing, but we have educated, we've been around long enough to know and recognize some things. So it looks like 10 is the middle front. So 11, 10, and 9 are the front row. I'm sorry, 6. I'm sorry, 6, 10, and right front here, I can't tell who that is. 9 is front row. 11 is back row. She's left back, and then the other 2 players in serve-receive formation are the other back row players. Looks like 5 and 1, I believe. So the thing is, 11, who is the left back setter, she can be as close to, she doesn't have to be stuck behind number 6. She just has to worry about being to the left of number 5, who's middle back. So 11 technically could come a little bit closer to her spot and just be to the left of number 5.
Good. The left.
So you have the potential overlap between who, Don? I'm sorry.
Number 10 who's the blonde. She's center front, and the person just to her right, which is the center back.
Very good.
She is slightly forward, so that she's good there. Notice number 11, who we've determined is the left back, stood flat-footed and raised her hands up because since she's back row, she's not allowed to block, but she can feign like she's going to block.
Let's keep the camera on Winnetonka the whole time. Don't follow the ball. Let's just keep the camera on Winnetonka this whole time. So whichever camera you got, 1 or 3, let's keep it on Winnetonka. Okay, now Winnetonka just earned the ball, so now they're going to rotate. So now, hopefully, you recognize that the setter is going to front row, number 11. And now the other thing you got to think about is number 9, if they're running a 6-2, which you might not know, 9 could be their second setter, who's opposite of 11. And it looks like that's the case. Looks like Winnetonka's running a 6-2 offense, and now probably they'll have number 9 hiding, and looks like that's what they're doing. So they have a back row setter in 9, and 10 is now the right front player, which actually is kind of nice when they run a 6-2, because then you know their setters are always back row in all 6 rotations, and there's no guesswork as to whether the setter, if they dump or if they attack or even block sometimes, whether they're back row or not. Okay, so 9 is now middle back. She's their setter, and let's just see where she lines up. Probably is going to line up in the middle with number 11, most likely. Yep. And now this right here, you guys, is a very common overlap. 9 is middle back. The other 2 players deep, 1 and I can't see the blonde there, those are probably left back and right back. So 10 it looks like. So 9 needs to be in between those 2. And then the other 3 people are the front row players, left, center, and right. Oftentimes the left back or the right back, and we'll get to see it again right here. Oftentimes the left back kind of scoots over or the right back scoots over so that it overlaps the middle back setter a lot of times in that scenario. But Coach Espinoza, being as great as he is, doesn't allow his players to do that. So 1 is left back, 9 is middle back, and then 5 is a front row player. Okay, so again, setter is middle back. So a lot of times this is where a lot of overlaps happen, is in this type of formation. So again, it depends on how you keep your lineup card. Some people use a list or use their 3x5 card. Some people use a wheel, and hopefully you can keep track of it that way.
Some people love the wheel.
Not one of them.
Neither am I.
And part of that could be because when I started, they had the wheels, but they weren't reliable. They would move around, and so it was difficult to know whether or not it had moved.
So hopefully
Back to
both Don
overlapping.
and Nicole realize that after Winnetonka rotates, now 9, hopefully in your mind you're keeping track that that's the setter. 9 is now left back. So now Winnetonka just lost the serve, and so now their formation will be such that 9 is going to be probably hiding in close proximity to their left front. Now this is really good here because we talked about this with the other setter. So 9 and 10 is middle back, and so 9 can be that far over. She does not have to be directly behind the left front. In this case, it looks like 12 is left front. Before, with the other setter, she was hiding directly behind left front, but notice this is legal. 9 is left back, 10 is middle back. That's fine, just as long as 9 is closer to the left sideline than the middle back.
She's coming close to jumping the gun, though, moving too soon.
So if there is an overlap, Don, how does the or Dixie, how does the R2 does the R2 want to call that right away if they're really close, or do they warn, or how? What's the best way to handle a situation like that when it's really close, or they are overlapping barely?
I'm sorry. I believe that you need to be 100% accurate, knowing that it is definitely an overlap. If you're questioning it, keep watching it, but I really believe you have to be 100% in your mind.
I agree. But if the overlap's there, we need to be calling it too.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and if it's a case like with the player moving too soon, I'm going to be calling that because they're attempting to gain an advantage. If there's definitely an overlap because they're moving too soon, I'm going to call that.
How do you warn though in that situation? What do you actually do?
If it's close enough to warn, hopefully during a dead ball or during a timeout or something, you'll have the opportunity to say, Coach, you got a potential overlap. Your setter is starting to leave too soon, or when she's lined up in a certain position, she's coming close to overlapping with whichever player is adjacent to her.
Again, preventative on some things there. It's not mandated that you warn them. However, you just want to remind them, hey, your center front and your center back are close to overlapping.
Sorry to interrupt, Dixie. We had just had match point there, so now let's watch Don and Nicole kind of administer match point. Don has just signaled that the match is over, crosses arms, and now the teams come together at the net, shake hands. And Don comes over, and are there any responsibilities now that the match is over that the R1 and the R2 have with the scorer's table?
We should be verifying that the score is accurate in the book. The R2 initials the score, and then once the officials leave the court, then the match is concluded. There's nothing that can be done if they find out there was a scoring irregularity or anything like that. Ideally, they would have, at the varsity level, would have already had their names and their numbers in the book, so we don't have to worry about taking care of that. Because Don provided the flags to the line judges, he's going to be collecting those, collecting all of his belongings. Typically, we have our gym bag with us, or just a bag for whatever equipment, the whistles and the lineup cards and such. And then we collect that and we leave, and we try to go someplace off the court. And one of the things GKCOA stresses is doing a debrief after the match. And that's one of the things that we're hopefully going to capture right after this.
Yeah, and that's important, just that debrief. And with your line judges, too, especially if they are GKC officials, they're on the line, you want to have a debrief, reflection on what happened. And then I think one thing we need to stress, too, is that you should always exit the building together when it's over, walk out as partners, just always be safe.
Okay, so Don and Nicole have made it up here. We're going to, we're going to use this camera that's up here on the table, and we're going to kind of back out a little bit and kind of get everybody back in the shot. And so we're going to kind of talk with Don and Nicole about some things, and I'll kind of lead it off here, and we're just going to kind of let Don and Nicole kind of talk about anything, to just have their debrief scenario. So we'll just kind of let them go here.
Go ahead, debrief from the first two.
And usually, yes, the first referee is the one who initiates it. But since they both were first referees, they kind of need to hammer that out.
So there's a couple things I thought of, and now, of course, I can't remember them because that was a long time ago. But one was line judges for sure. Even when you ask them, have you done this before? And they're like, yeah, I've done this before. Clearly, the one girl had either not done it, or she was just really nervous. So I needed to do a better job, more thorough job of going through stuff with her, I think. And I just went through stuff when I know we were hurrying, but just don't ever get in a hurry with line judges, and don't take it for granted they know what they're doing, because she was struggling. But I'm trying to think, like that was so long ago. What else?
The second match, well, both matches, the Staley coach was a little bit confused. She had a 31 and 13. She wrote it backwards. But the actual one that we actually had to have a sub on was, I don't remember the number, but she actually wanted that player in, but was not in the starting lineup. So in order to get her on that lineup, into the lineup, she had to take a substitution. So.
You want to talk about the administrative yellow card?
Administrative
Se-
yellow card,
second.
yeah. The reason why, and Candy actually, Coach Candy helped us on that one. The player for Oak Park stepped into the substitution zone, which I recognized with a whistle. She was one rotation early, and so the coach has a choice either to put her in or take a delay. And Coach Candy decided to take a delay. So.
So the thing that we stressed during the match was that the coach, and this is a misconception of some officials, the coach does not have to follow through with the substitution. They can retract it, and then the administrative delay happens. Anything else that the two of you want to discuss before we ask a few questions here?
I can't recall.
I can think.
Okay. So is there anything that the two of you want to address or anything you wanted to ask questions about?
The only thing I had was it was in the match when you were up, and it was a line judge issue where it looked like a bit of confusion. There was a ball near you, I think, that landed, that I thought at first you called it in and then reversed it to an out.
And I accidentally went the wrong way with it, and I just acknowledged, hey, that was my fault. The ball is this way. My line judge had a great call there.
Okay. And that's kind of what we thought, but we wanted to just verify that.
I mean, it's just saying, hey, I made a mistake. Coaches know that. So,
yeah.
Which I'd commented, you did signal to yourself, kind of patted yourself on your chest that, yeah, that's my error. And I complimented you because I think that's important that we as officials recognize if we make an error and adjust things appropriately to support that.
thank you.
I thought you both did a really nice job, calm
Thank you.
on the court, very patient. You're not getting in a hurry. I appreciate that as an official as well when working with you both. But coaches appreciate that too. It's a sign of confidence, and you're making those signals. You're not getting in a hurry, and sometimes you get in a hurry. What are you calling? And people need to see that. So great job on your patience with your calling.
Plus, if you get into a hurry and you're rushed, that's when you're more prone to make mistakes, or you start to anticipate that a player is not going to be able to make a play on the ball, and you're more prone to whistle an illegal contact when there shouldn't be one. So we'd rather have a patient whistle that's right than one that's quick and wrong.
And there was a couple times where, they wanted a touch, and I wasn't sure if there was a touch. I didn't see a touch, so I whistled, and I waited. And I think that's something I've had to make myself do instead of quickly signal. Because then if you don't look at your line judges, then they have a touch, and then it looks like you're in a disagreement. So just checking all four corners to make sure you all agree before you give the signal. Even if you blow the whistle, just wait till you give the signal to make sure.
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I did have one thing just popped in my head. And when you go back and watch this, the last point of the Staley Oak Park was out of rotation, but I did not call it because the ball was served into the net. So, but if the ball had gone over, we would have called out of rotation.
The serving team was out of rotation, is what you're
No, the receiving team, the setter left, they switched early, but the ball was served into the net. And so that was a service fault. So we no out of rotation.
We'll look at that and answer that question in a little bit. So, okay. So here's the thing. How did you guys feel about your performance with ball handling?
I think it's at this level, at varsity level, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit cleaner than when you get down to freshman and JV. So I think that helps. But I think okay. Gosh, I don't know. You put me on the spot again.
Were there any calls that you wish you had back? I guess or no calls.
There was one, and I remember it was on a Staley girl, and it was on the first contact, and she did one of these, and I don't know what she was trying to do, and it was probably prolonged contact. That's the one that sticks out in my mind. That I don't know what she was trying to do, but it was obviously can't call a double, so you call it prolonged contact. But it looked pretty gross. So.
Don, anything on your end?
I know the coach probably didn't care for the double that went over, but my advice to you, make sure you call the doubles that go over because it's not fair to the other team.
Good. So in the third match, we focused a lot on focus a lot on overlaps and watching specific rotations and so forth. So what is it? Because I wasn't really focused when you were calling overlaps in that second match. What was it that you were seeing, and how bad were the overlaps?
Okay, and the first one that I called, the setter was right front. So they were stacked right front, middle front, left front. And, excuse me, the setter was left front. And she came across, she was definitely closer to the line, closer to me than middle front. So she had already passed middle front. And she almost passed the right front too.
So it was a situation where the left front was overlapping the middle. I'm sorry, the left back was overlapping the, or is it left front? I'm sorry.
Left front. They were
left
all,
front
they
was
were all three,
overlapping the middle.
all
middle
three were
front.
up front.
So it was just a switch when they were
Yes.
trying to switch in the front, where they were just doing it
Yes,
too fast.
yes.
Okay.
And then the second one, the setter just left way too early. And Coach Candy said it's a bad habit they pick up during summer league because there's nobody reffing them.
So we talked up here about overlaps and philosophy regarding overlaps. So, in your opinion, those were blatant enough to whistle?
Yes.
Okay. So what would you do if you were to? Where would a warning be warranted, and how would you do that?
Yeah. Well, I explained that to Coach, the Oak Park coach. I said if you weren't clear down the end of the bench, I probably could have talked you through that one. But she was clear down on the other end of the bench. There was nobody I could really talk to. I don't know if you picked up a couple times in the, I believe it was
You did it to
Staley.
Staley, yeah.
I stepped up because they were on my side, and I said, take a step back or take a step forward.
So you did talk to the coach or the team?
To the players.
To the players.
Depends on where they're at, I think, on the court. Obviously, if they're closest to you, assistant coach sitting next to you, you can same thing. The head coach isn't there, but especially early in the season, give them a couple. Everybody's trying out new rotations, so give them a couple warnings, and then obviously if it's on the third rotation, they still can't figure it out, then they need to be called for it. So.
Okay, very good. So a lot of the things I had questions about, you guys have already addressed. I was going to ask about the administrative yellow, the overrules, and the overlaps. Are there anything else? Anything else comes to mind?
I hardly ever overrule a line judge unless I am 100% certain that it is one way or the other the wrong call, because I just don't like to do it. But I think if you watched the ones I did,
we totally agreed.
And I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, from up here
If
we
it's
totally
close,
agreed with you.
If it's close and I disagree, but I'm still not sure, I'll go with the line judge calls. But those weren't close, so that's why. And I feel bad doing it, but I can't give a point away for something that obvious. So.
Very good. Okay, anything else before we wrap it up?
Nope.
All right, well, we thank you very much for your patience with us as we tried to put this on the air. We know that some of you weren't able to watch all of it live because of some technical difficulties. We will have this on demand, so hopefully in the future you can watch the whole thing. And then obviously if you haven't seen any of this and you're watching this on demand later on, if you have questions, you can email ken.korm@nkcschools.org. Hopefully if you have a YouTube account, you can at the bottom of the account in case you have questions if you're watching this later on. So on behalf of Nicole, Don, and Dixie, I'm Ken Korm, and much on behalf of the Greater Kansas City Officials Association. Thank you, and